All right, what is going on? Good morning. Thank you for checking in. It is Ryan Dreyer. I'm doing my Ironman Texas race recap video. I earned the hat. We're hanging out here. It is Tuesday, April 26th. The race was on Saturday. 9:15 a.m. here. We're hanging out in the backyard. And maybe like the biggest win of literally the whole weekend is that when we came back for the first time, we saw some grass sprouting here in the backyard. So I think that you can see some of the weeds up there. Not really ideal to have weeds growing, but like literally any growth is cool with me right now. We got a bunch of grass sprouting over here, some over on that side of the yard as well. So basically spending all day today now just like soaking the grass because it just went 5 days without any water, but still started to grow. So good vibes on that end, good vibes from the Ironman race, and ultimately just kind of checking in here on how everything went. Got a little coffee, got a little water. So we're hanging out. All right, race was Saturday, and I guess to start with the pre-race setup and kind of build to the start, I was so nervous. I was so nervous. We got to the swim start almost like an hour before the race started. We stayed like 30 minutes away, and I had to check in at the transition area, which was separate from where the swim start was. So we just wanted to like give ourselves time and not really be rushed with like the logistics that we had going on, which was like a good thing because we had plenty of time. But with all of that time, I was kind of just like sitting at the swim start, just doing nothing but thinking about what I was about to do that day. And like the day before and really like in the weeks leading up to the race, like I was so focused on like visualizing the race, thinking about how I wanted to feel, thinking about what I needed to do to feel how I wanted. The day before, like I wrote down a ton of just like my thoughts, my expectations, and what I wanted to get out of the race. I talked through the entire race with Chelsea, but once that race morning showed up, like I was just really nervous, and I wasn't like nervous about like performing well. I was more of just like nervous about like just like the magnitude of what I was going to be doing and just like the sheer volume of the day. And I was like almost thinking about it like too big picture. Chelsea took a picture of me sitting there. I was just like trying to get my heart rate down. My heart rate was like almost double my resting heart rate. And I was just like trying to become a bit more present and just sort of chill out a little bit because I was just like kind of shitting my pants leading up to the race. And this was sort of like going on like literally until I actually headed right to the start. The way that these starts work is you basically just line up in the chute and, you know, you just sort of progress through, and they've got people who kind of let you in. There's like a beep, 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 and then they let people through. So it wasn't until I was like probably 10 feet from starting that I finally calmed down a little bit. There was a dude that I got to chatting with. His name was Fabian. He like asked me how long I wanted to do the swim in, and I was like, I don't know, 105-ish, and he said that that was about the same for him. And just like that quick little like connection and that quick little chat, like just kind of distracted me from like the nerves and everything else. And then also just like standing there and physically seeing people like just a few in front of me, like walking into the water or running in, whatever they're doing, and then starting to swim. Seeing that, I was like, okay, like I can do this. But it wasn't really until that moment that like I felt super comfortable, which was just like a new thing for me. I've obviously had a couple of race mornings and I've been nervous before, but not really to the level that I was for Ironman Texas. So I was kind of managing that for the good bit of the morning. As I got into the swim started off really well for me. This was my first time swimming 2.4 miles straight in open water, which I just think is like super different than doing an Ironman race that has like a 2-loop swim. So the Indiana swim was 1.2 miles. You hop out, you run like 100 yards on the beach, and then you hop in again and swim 1.2 again. So I really think that that break is just like a lot easier to like digest mentally. So I knew this was going to be my first time swimming 2.4 straight, and so I really was just cognizant to like pace myself. My big focuses were just like getting my breath down, really making sure that my goggles weren't leaking in any way, and then just like pacing myself well. So I thought that my goggles were great. I had really no issues with my goggles, and my breathing was really solid right away. Like I had really big, powerful breaths out of the nose, really just like clear airflow all around, like out through the nose, in through the mouth, and I felt super comfortable. I did lose my breath for like a quick second, maybe like 10 minutes in, but I took like a brief pause, got it back, and kept going. The other things like just related to the swim is that I really have not had any open water swim practice since literally October when I did Ironman Indiana. So I hadn't even put on my wetsuit. The first time I put it on post Indiana was Friday, jumping in the water and splashing around for a few minutes. So I really had no open water swim practice, and I wasn't really used to swimming in my wetsuit. And those were just like two things that I think I could have improved upon, or I think that like with a little bit more practice I would have benefited from. Open water is just a lot different than the pool, and I just feel like my form was probably not as sound as it typically is in the pool. And since I wasn't really used to swimming in my wetsuit, my upper body started to fatigue after a while. Just like the consistent reach with, you know, the slight restriction of the wetsuit. But overall, like I was really pleased to make it through the swim. One thing that I didn't really like check in on was going to be the alerts that were on my watch. I just hadn't checked on what they were for open water swim. And I think that I have two different alerts going on. I think that I have one that's for every 10 minutes and one that is for every 750 meters. So I had like some consistent buzzing that I could just tell wasn't really related to, well, it was related to swimming distance and swimming for time, but it wasn't like consistent. I could tell like just based on the periods that it was buzzing at that it was kind of on two different modes. So I actually haven't even checked in on that, but that's what I think it was. I think like the other thing about the swim was just that like I was really ready for it to be done before it was over. The swim basically went like you hopped in the water, you went all the way down to the right for basically 0.8, then you went all the way back for basically another 0.8, and then you went and made a hard right turn into this canal area for basically the final 0.8. And it really helped me to like check down to my endurance pacing and then push it a little bit if I felt well, and then check back. And that really helped me out a lot because after a while I was like, okay, I'm really ready to get out of the water. I finished the swim in 106:30. That was my official gun time, which I was super pumped with. My Indiana swim was 109. I forget the second mark on that. But the big thing that like I wanted to focus on for the swim was not cramping. I cramped like 3 times at Ironman Indiana. And so I made sure to have a lot of carbs before my race this time. That was different than last time. I had no carbs before Indiana. Super stupid. So I had a big bowl of oatmeal like 3 hours before the race, and then I had maple syrup in the hour leading into the race start. And I actually think that I could have had more fuel. I could really tell that like I was on the verge of cramping. I almost felt one come in my left calf, and then when I got out of the water, my legs were just like jello. The exit from the water was kind of interesting. It wasn't like on a shore, so you didn't like get out and then run out. You exited in this canal. So we hopped out to the left, and they had like a quick set of like 3 or 4 stairs, and they had a bunch of volunteers that were like helping people out. And I just like, one thing that I could definitely improve upon is just like learning more about the logistics of how the race is going to go, because I had like zero understanding of how we were going to be getting out of the water. And so then all of a sudden, after swimming for an hour and 6 minutes straight, like someone's reaching their hand out to me. I'm a little bit like, what the hell is going on? They pull me up. As soon as my body weight is supported by my legs like don't want to move. But they're like ushering you kind of through the chute and towards transition. They had wetsuit strippers, which I have not had before. So they had people that like would throw me down on the ground, and then they helped yank my wetsuit off. I was a little bit unclear. I'm like, do you guys take my wetsuit? They're like, no, you keep it. So I'm still a little bit like disoriented, and they're sending me around. We made like a hard U-turn around this corner to then go into the transition area, and they had another guy that was like reaching out his arm to like swing you around. So all just like tiny little logistics that were completely fine, but I wasn't really expecting them. And I was just like really discombobulated getting out of the water. But overall, like I was really pleased with the swim. I was very proud to have finished it, like, you know, ultimately pretty strong. I didn't need to stop for any reason. My breathing was really good. And just that check down from like my push pace down to my endurance pace was really, really helpful for me. Got into transition really easily, threw on my shoes, my bike helmet. Everything else that I was gonna need was at my bike. And the way that the transitions worked at Texas was they used the gear bags, and then they had like a changing tent type of thing that they would put you in. So they had a bunch of chairs set up. So I just sat down at a chair, threw on my shoes, threw on my helmet, threw my wetsuit, my goggles, and my swim cap into my bag, and then handed that to the volunteer who would leave that for me. When I got to my bike, the only thing that I needed to do on my bike was throw my big maple syrup flask into my back pocket, throw on my sunglasses, and then I had some backup fuel that I threw into my shirt, into my tri-suit. Hopped onto the bike, and one thing that I'm just recognizing now, like across all the races that I've done, my best bike split was at Ironman Boulder 70.3. And I rode at 22.6 miles an hour for 56 miles, and I really, really crushed that bike ride. I didn't have a power meter then, so I'm not totally sure what my power output was, but I know it was high. But when I think back to that race, I just remember that like the first 10 miles of that race were insanely fast. We just got on a highway, and I don't know what it really was. I don't know if there was like a strong tailwind, because it was an up and back for that first 10 mile stretch. And obviously any downhill would then be met with uphill, but whatever it was, like that first 10 miles was insanely fast. And I remember finishing those 10 miles, and I think that I was like over 24 mile an hour average. So like as I finished that ride, like I was just in such a great spot to maintain really good pacing. And I was just like preventing my speed from going too far down as the race progressed. And now that I've done a couple more races, both the full distance Ironmans that I've done, Indiana and now Texas, the first like 10 miles or so kind of navigate through like smaller roads close to where the race is before they then put you out onto like the highway. And so for like me, that's just like a learning that like I'm not gonna have an insanely fast start to the bike if we've got like a lot of turns and a lot of U-turns before we get out onto the highway. So that's just like something that I've recognized. The first 10 or 15 miles on the bike were really solid. Just kind of cruising through roads in the town as we headed out towards the highway. I saw Chelsea at mile 6 and then mile 9. She was posted up at an area where we did a Yui. So I saw her on the way out and then a couple minutes on the way back. And ultimately it was like 10 or 15 miles before we made our way out to the toll road where the bulk of the ride was. So the bulk of the ride was a north to south up and back that we would do 2 times. And it was about 20 miles down, 20 miles back, 20 down, 20 back for about 80. And the remaining 32 of the ride was kind of out on the roads closer to, I guess, just like the race venue or whatever it was. So first 10, 15 miles were solid, and then I got onto the toll road and got kind of rocked like right away, honestly. There was a really, really brutal headwind, and so like right away, I could just sort of tell that my speed wasn't where I wanted it to be. And I like knew, like, you know, I'd worked with my coach and just kind of recognized, like, when you have a headwind, like, just, you know, just settle into it and just know that you're going to get it on the way back. So I like had that frame of mind, but for some reason, I don't know, it just like kind of defeated me. It didn't really like make too much of a negative impact until like creeping into like the 30th mile, maybe 25 to 30. But it was just like beating me down. And I was getting passed a lot, and I was just recognizing that I just really like wasn't in my groove. One area that like I have really identified as like a big gap between me and people that are more experienced and better than me is that like when you get into uncomfortable conditions like that, like the experienced riders and like the good racers, like they will just hop down in aero and they'll just cruise. And even though they're not going to be going as fast as they want, they just stick to their power output, and they just power on. Whereas me, I was like getting in and out of aero. I was having too much tension in my upper body that was causing a lot of pain into my traps and my upper back. And I was honestly just like losing focus a little bit, and just like bitching. I just wanted it to not be going as poorly as it was. I made my way down to, we got a plane overhead, hopefully it's not too loud. I made it down. Made the Yui. I had a really good pee, right at the turn. It was on like this incline of the highway, so I turned around. I had a decline with me, and I got to kind of coast and had a really good bathroom break. But then, like even when I had the wind with me, I just still wasn't feeling as good as I should have. My upper body was still like really sore. I had a lot of tension in my back and my traps still. And I just sort of kept cruising. I mean, I was at a much faster pace. I was easily going 24, 25, 26, even up into almost 30 miles an hour. But like still just didn't really feel right. And it wasn't until I then got to the top of that loop that I really turned things around. So I guess just to like backtrack a little bit, when I got to the 40-mile mark, which was the bottom of that first stretch, I was at like an average speed of 17 miles an hour, which was just kind of like defeating because I just knew that like my bike leg was going to be taking a lot longer than I was hoping it would. But I picked up some speed, obviously, with the wind. I think I was around 18 when I got to the end of that loop. And when I turned around at that point, I was 3 hours into the ride, and I popped some amino acid tablets, I popped a caffeine pill, and I took some magnesium. And then a few minutes after that, I got to chatting with a guy who was like of similar ability. And he and I just bounced a couple of questions back and forth, and we're just chatting a little bit, and that just like totally flipped how everything was going for me in my mind. So I think it was like a combination of the caffeine as well as chatting with this dude. Unfortunately, I did not get his bike number. I thought that I knew it, but I didn't remember it correctly. So I haven't figured out who he was. But the first thing that he said to me that like kind of kicked off us talking is he just looked at me and he just said, "This has got to be 27-mile-an-hour winds." And I just like appreciated that comment because it wasn't negative at all. It was just like factual. Like it was just like, this is 27-mile-an-hour winds. Like this is nuts. And I remember from Ironman Indiana, there was some wind and there was some rain. And there was this one guy that I was kind of doing a little bit of a push and pull with. We weren't chatting at all, but I had passed him, he had passed me, and I knew we were kind of in the same range of just kind of hanging around the same spot together. And when the weather kind of took a real turn in Indiana, I remember hearing this dude say, like, "I hate the fucking wind," or "I hate the fucking rain." I forget if it was wind or rain, whatever he said. But I just remembered hearing him say that, and I just remember being like, you can't be thinking like that. And after he said that, like I had passed him, and he never passed me again. After we had like a big back and forth for a while. So like, I'm just super cognizant of just like, even though the race was kind of wearing me down in the beginning, not like vocalizing how hard it is. And I just appreciated that this dude just said, "This is 27-mile-an-hour winds," and I was just like, yeah. I don't know. I don't have anything to actually figure out what the speed of the wind is, but it's hard wind and it's heavy wind. And so he then asked me how many watts I was doing, how many average watts I was at, and I was at 171. And he was like, "That feels like that's about what I'm at." It sounded like he knew about his power, but he didn't have a power meter. I asked him how long he did the swim in. He said he did it in 107, and I knew that I did mine in 106. So I was like, dude, we should be hanging out. Like, we need to be jamming here together. So we got to chatting a little bit more. He said he had done 8 halves, but this was his first full. He said that his goal for the run was to run like 9:15s, but really just not blow up. I told him that I did Indiana, and told him that I had some pace goals for the run. I was wanting to do the run in under 8:30, but my real goal was just to not blow up. So he and I had a little bit of a push-pull, which was just great. And I was watching a Lionel Sanders YouTube video on Friday before the race, and he was chatting about Oceanside. It was his Oceanside recap. And he was just talking about like catching up with somebody and them like putting in work together is how he described it. And I haven't really like thought about this before, but like I definitely now understand it after this ride, because like I was leading for a little bit, then that dude would lead for a little bit, then we would just kind of alternate back and forth. And like when you're the leader, like you just focus on like keeping the push and keeping the pace. And when you're the follower, you just kind of worry about keeping up with the person. And we weren't drafting or anything like that, but just like in the same vicinity of how we're riding together. And like just the detail of that like completely made me forget about anything related to the weather that was an issue for me. So we did that for a while. And then I ended up just kind of blown away, and I didn't see that guy again, but we rode together for probably 30 minutes. And I remember it was 171 average watts that I was at when he asked me, and when I finished that stretch into the wind, I was at 179 watts. So I really put in good power on that stretch. I saw Chelsea on that stretch. I saw her around the 75 mile mark. And it was really at like mile 65 or so when I popped the caffeine and when I got into this guy. And that just like completely flipped how the race went for me. The big thing that like I focused on for the bike was like I did not want to lose myself mentally on the bike. And I definitely did in the beginning, but when I think back to Ironman Indiana, I was really in it well for like the first 2/3 of the ride. But when I got to like around maybe mile 80, I was like, get me the fuck off this bike. And the final 30 or whatever miles were not good. And so this was like the opposite. It was like it started off pretty well, and then I had like a good chunk of the ride that was not positive for me. But then I flipped it, and I finished the ride super, super strong, and ultimately set myself up for success on the run. So I was really proud of that. That was a big thing for me, and that really just changed the way that the entire day unfolded. Some of like my nutritional logistics on the bike. So I had the big flask of maple syrup right in my back pocket, and that worked flawlessly. I was on the money every 15 minutes, taking in fuel. I did a really good job of getting waters from aid stations, and I think that a mistake that I've made in my previous races is like really trying to rush through the aid stations and like not wanting to slow down. And there have even been times that like I'm flying through an aid station and I go to grab a water from a guy, a volunteer, and like I just smack it out of their hand and I don't grab it because like there's just too much activity and too much force. So for this ride, like I really made an effort to slow down and to go through and to give myself time to get potentially multiple water bottles. And so my strategy with getting water was basically a few different things. One, try to fill up my Aero bottle that was between my bars. Two, drink some at that moment if I felt like I needed to. Three, shove it into the crevice of my helmet and completely cool myself off by just dumping water over my head. And then four was throwing it into the cage in my frame. So that was really what I was working on. And you know, there'd be like, sometimes I would just grab it and douse myself first. Sometimes I would drink first. Sometimes if I felt good, I'd try to fill up the bottle first. But that was like kind of what I was up to in the aid stations, and it worked really, really well. I think that like the biggest thing for me was honestly just keeping my body cool with the water dumps onto the head. It helped so much to have ventilation in my helmet that I could do that. I would also then just like dump it on my chest, dump it like above my sunglasses so it would like kind of rain down over my face, dump it down my neck, the back of my neck, and just like do my best to like keep my body cool and keep my body comfortable. I did a good job with my salt tube, like just taking in a decent amount of salt every hour, and just kind of like gauging the ration of that with the amount of plain water that I took in. I had the 2 water bottles on the back of my bike on the seat bottle cages that I've got. And my intention was to try to save those for as long as I could, because I knew that the plastic water bottles that they give out, they're not super reliable to stay in those behind the seat bottle cages. So I was actually able to save those behind the seat ones until mile 80, which I thought was sweet, because then those had salt in them. So like at that point I could then focus on drinking out of those and just keeping myself cool with the waters from the aid stations. The maple syrup flask that I had in my jersey pocket had enough fuel for 5 hours of riding, which is what I was expecting to do the ride in. But as soon as my time was significantly slower, or my speed was slower, I knew that I was going to be riding for close to 6 hours. And I had a couple of extra of those like Maple Dude maple syrup packets. I had 3 of them with me. I actually had 4 of them on my bike. I had 1 in my little plastic compartment that was on my bike frame, and then I threw 3 of them in my jersey. So I knew that I had extra fuel, and then I also knew that I had the other small flask waiting for me at the bike special needs area. So I didn't really feel like having to finick with all of the gel packets, so I just didn't even deal with them, and I just got the additional flask at the bike special needs, and I knew that that would be plenty to get me through whatever else I needed on the ride. So that was kind of it. Just felt so proud and confident, like coming in through the end of the ride. There were probably like another 10 miles once we got off the highway and cruised back to the transition area. And there were a couple of other riders near me then, but I felt like super confident. I passed a couple of people, I was riding strong, and I really finished strong through the end of the ride. Getting into the run, so I felt really good, like just settling into the run. Ultimately, like I think that even though my bike was a lot slower than I wanted it to be, you know, that was just basically 2 things. The headwind, obviously, but like 2 is that I lost a little bit of focus and probably could have done a better job of just staying in aero and just kind of powering through that. But regardless, I did a really good job of like fueling and hydrating and setting myself up for success on the run, which was like the main focus of the whole race. Like really what I just really wanted to execute on was like, I wanted to have a good run and I wanted to finish the race strong. And at Indiana, I don't really want to say that like I blew up, because I didn't really have any issues, but like I just broke down. And so I did some walking. I tried to implement some like walk-run strategies, but I had no actual strategy for that. So it was just like walking when I felt like I needed to, then trying to run. And I was just like kind of pouting and kind of being a sissy through the end of that. And so fixing that was like the biggest thing that I wanted to do for this race. So I settled in. I told Chelsea, you know, when I kind of hop onto the run off of a ride, it's hard for me to gauge my pacing, so I just sort of go by feel. And so my first mile, I just wanted to settle into it, and really just like not push it, but at the same point just like feel out how I'm doing. And that first mile I ran at like 7:50 something, so just under 8. And so that sort of told me like, okay, like check down a little bit, give yourself some pacing, you know, feel out your endurance effort. And so basically for like miles 1 through 9, I ran at around like an 8:30 pace. And I was really proud of myself because like I definitely could have been running faster, but I just knew that this was going to be a long effort. So I did a good job of like checking back, and just like making sure that I know that I'm in this for the long haul, and this is 26.2 miles, and we can't run this. You know, you can't run a marathon in 100 yards. So like slow down and chill out and settle in. I saw Chelsea at the start of the run. I saw her at mile 4, I saw her at mile 11, and then I saw her again at mile 20, and then at the finish. So I guess like just some of the logistics of the run. So I had my hydration belt with my 2 water bottles on it, and I had all of my Louis maple syrup shots. So my intention was to take in 200 calories an hour on the run, just dumping the maple syrup shots into a bottle and drinking those, using the other bottle for